It's famous that people who deal with intellectual problems solve them while they're going on walks. And somehow the extension of your mind and the use of your left and right brain in bilateral exercise in the condition of dealing with a problem or a trauma or a situation.
You're listening to Brainwork Framework, a business and marketing podcast, brought to you by focus-biz.com.
Thanks again for joining us for this next episode. With us today is Lincoln Stoller. He is a psychotherapist, experienced with neuropsychology, and a clinical counselor with mind strength balance. So excited to have him on today. Lincoln, thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
Thanks for inviting me, Chris. I have a sinus infection that is abating right now, but I always get excited with these interviews.
Of course. And I am no stranger to the sinus issues that plague us around this time of year. So I totally understand. No worries. We always like to ask our experts in their field, tell us about your journey. What were you doing and how did you get into the line of work that you're doing today?
Well, sounds like a simple question. I was the child of an artist and an engineer, and it's a very good engineer in photography. He's the paradigm of architectural photographers in the mid-20th century, and an absent mother who was an artist. So all my brothers and sisters are artists. So after a lot of struggle in school where I didn't meet very good artists or engineers, I went into PhD in physics and quantum theory and had a few great mentors and a lot of really crappy teachers. I've had some good ideas as a student, but no one wanted to listen to them. It's very typical. And then I got into computers because I had that skill, and a thought came to mind, as any good business person will appreciate. Here's a problem that needed to be solved, and I can solve it. Idealistic approach. And the problem was how to write an accounting system that was portable for all businesses, because the accounting is well formed, but the business's purpose is varied, and there's inventories and people and contacts. So that's what the accounting system was. It took me a bunch of years, but I found I wasn't really interested in marketing. I was interested in the technology, and it didn't market itself. So I did that for 20 years and sold it to about 40 middle-sized businesses, and each one needed customization, and they were very interesting. But the most successful clients were the most technical ones because they understood where I was coming from, and they understand what they needed to do and the time frames of what it would take. So that was interesting. It was a funny market because I was selling to the business end user, but I was also selling to the developer market of software programmers who are sort of reluctant buyers. They're waiting for a client before they buy. And so sometimes I had to be part of a team. I had colleagues who provided the service of customization. I provided the software, client provided the money, and those were all interesting. And some worked and some didn't. This was in the 80s and the 90s, and was a time of offshoring, and a lot of businesses were going out of business because manufacturing was going overseas, and not a lot of people understood the investment you had to make in computers. So very interesting, but somewhat like a strange movie where you can't quite figure what the plot is here, and you can't figure out who the heroes are, and you can't figure out whether it's going to end happily or not. So, I mean, that's why we get paid. And that's why I learned, and I'm very good now at getting paid. People say, gee, how come you ask for money right up front? I said, well, in business, you learn that if you don't ask for it up front, then it just lingers in the background and it doesn't do anyone any good. So that's really important. Never hesitate asking for what you are due right up front. And I'd say that would be a lesson I should have learned in school too, because students are taught never to ask for what they're worth. They're always treated like garbage. And that doesn't work out well either. So then at that point, I was doing a lot of traveling. I sort of skipped over the fact that I was a mountaineer, which is important because it's the people you meet that make a lot of impression on your life. And I was meeting in mountaineering a lot of pretty strange people, very driven, somewhat in the range between foolish and courageous. Most of them are dead because they moved over that line to the foolish side. And some of my greatest mountaineering mentors were on the courageous side. And this is the one thing you have to learn about mountaineering, or you should know as an observer, that all the greatest mountaineers never make good stories. They never make good copy. They never get in trouble. They do what they intend to do. And if things go bad, they go running home because they're always able to go back. And you don't hear about them because they don't make the dramatic stories. You hear about, it's like criminals, which is another interesting thing. If you're in business, you learn something about crime because you end up having some peripheral relationship with it. Some of my best clients turned out to be criminals. And then you get this bizarre misunderstanding of crime as the people who were caught. Crime is not the people who are caught. Crime is the people who commit it, and they are a different brand from the ones who are caught. And none of the Batman and Joker movies are going to tell you what a real good criminal is. And in fact, it should be mentioned, incidentally, my best mountaineering mentor, there's a good chance that he was a criminal. Nobody knew it, and I only sort of discovered it incidentally decades later through some incidental meeting with someone else. No one knew what he really did. And I consider that's probably what you'd call a good criminal, or maybe you call it a good businessman. But when you break into people's houses and steal things, it's a funny business. He didn't do that anymore. Another good thing maybe about business and university and crime is that when you don't need it, you don't cross over to the foolish side. You stay on the clear-headed side. You ask for what you deserve, you collect it up front, and you minimize the risks. So in addition to all this, at some point I realized the world was an interesting place. I didn't have to go climb these mountains all the time, and they're miserable conditions. Sometimes it's great and wonderful, but a lot of times it's just miserable and suffering. So I started to hang out in the jungle and in the tundra and visit strange places with funny languages I didn't speak. And I got involved. You could probably see this sort of tendency in my personality to go for the weird. In these ceremonies, there were ayahuasca ceremonies, psychedelic, religious, tribal, strange, North and South American, mostly South American. And from there, because I had a computer background and some interest in neurology, there were people studying the mind under the influence of psychedelics. And I got involved with what's called brain training. And these people would also measure people's brains while they were having psychedelic experiences. I wasn't that interested because it's like, okay, so what? It's like studying mountaineering. You don't study it, you go do it. So I started doing it. And then I found, well, they didn't really know exactly what was going on either. I mean, the shamans are great. They're wonderful sort of artists of a kind, but you can't ask them any questions. They just laugh at you. So I started studying psychology. Well, I studied therapy and I studied hypnotherapy, altered state work, which is not well regarded in psychology, or hasn't been, but now it's starting to become popular because psychedelics are starting to be called therapeutic for once. And again, I had this computer background, I had this neurology background, a physics background. I understood the machines, I understood some of the theory. So I started practicing what's called neurofeedback therapy for a decade. There wasn't a good track to learn it, so I mentored with a bunch of people around the country. And that's really great because when you're outside of the approved channels of learning, you learn a lot of other stuff. I remember one of the people told me, I just work with my clients through telepathy. So I don't know what that means, but he had an idea and he was famous for his work. And he said, I never tell anyone that, but I'll tell you because you asked. So what does that mean? Like looking through the telescope that no one ever looked through before. And I still don't know what it means, but I'm starting to understand. As we mentioned before we started recording, I go on walks every day and starts to unlock new ideas. So to wrap that up, I did a course in psychotherapy, sort of accelerated 1-year course. And I embraced my unconventional thoughts and background, then pissed off the teachers, but they didn't know very much. They were just foot soldiers in a psychotherapy is a kind of low level profession where they're trying to generate as many practitioners as possible to satisfy demand. And then supposedly more skilled, you become a psychologist. And then if you're the most skilled, you become a psychiatrist, which is sort of backwards because psychiatrists, in my experience, they don't know anything about psychology. They're just pharmaceutical. They become doctors. I mean, this is the most mechanical of all, the least connected to the mind, and that they are the most powerful. And that upside down situation pervades to this day. So if you want to deal with the depths of mind, you have to be permitted by the person who knows the least about it. I mean, you could say that's reflected in politics too, and world events too. It's like, it's not a small jump, metaphorically. And where does this put us as business people and entrepreneurs? But maybe it takes us right back to that foolish, courageous boundary where you have to work on what's important without getting into much trouble and right up front, ask for being paid. So I work with clients now psychotherapeutically, and I don't know where they find me. I try to do all my work remotely. But some of the brain training work that I do, which is neurofeedback, which involves hooking people up to an amplifier and watching their brain waves while they talk to me in a hypnotic trance, involves them coming into my office. So a couple of people I see locally. And then I'm trying to extend that to everyone because there's some new sort of do-it-yourself technologies where you can buy little EEG amplifiers that you put on your head and connect to a cell phone and upload the data to the cloud. And it sort of works. I'm still experimenting. I subscribed to one program last month, my first subscription to an affordable program. Didn't like it too much, but yeah, it was doing it. And I got a few clients to do it too. And you learn that alpha waves and beta waves and gamma, delta, theta waves. And you're trying to learn to coordinate them in context with your state of mind, which is not very different from going for a walk, where you're trying to alternately activate your left and right brains while you consider an issue that's taking you from an alert to a vigilant to a relaxed state. Not all that different, but it's a different mode. So that's sort of working out. I do that sort of neurotherapy and I talk to people, and most people don't understand. And I would say this to everyone. You have to pay attention to what your brain is doing because it's underlying everything you're doing. Every problem you have, every idea you have, every insight, every step forward has, you have to give some credit to your brain or some blame to your brain if it's failing. And you never really know because you're only one person looking out one front window. And I'm now in the Pacific Northwest. I grew up on the East Coast and I'm still trying to get my mind around winter, rainy, cold, cloudy weather. And my son, who's grown up here on the West Coast, says that's what he likes. Winter, rainy, cold, gray weather. It's what you're used to. So if your mind is persistent in its habits, you won't even know that it's a habit. You'll just think it's normal. And I've had experiences, many, when I do brain training with people. They say, well, the brain training didn't do anything at all, but everyone's nice to me now. Just yesterday, all these people said hello to me in the store and I was offered a job. And I don't know why. And it's like, I know why. It's because you're presenting yourself differently. And you don't know it because you're just in a better mood. Except now it's really happening. It's not because you won the lottery or something. It's internal. So I think really important. And if I'm talking to business people and entrepreneurials and even marketing people, oh, you marketing people, I'd love to love you, but I have my troubles.
We get it. We get it.
Yeah, I got to do it myself. And it's a struggle. I got to start a new Kickstarter campaign, and that's all marketing. Kickstarter is all marketing, right? You got some products, but its success is rests on its marketing. I think I'll hire somebody. So everybody should know that your state of mind, your fundamental state of mind is flexible. It's learnable to some degree. And I think it's really important to recognize that it's not entirely emotional, it's not entirely intellectual, and it's not entirely physical. And they all interact. To me, emotions are a summation of your thoughts and experiences. Your body is sort of the underlying metronome that sets the rhythm of your awareness and engagement. And your mind is just supposedly the important thing, but it's really just like chatter. It's like the Tetris game that's trying to fit the pieces together on the top, but you don't know where the pieces are coming from. And you're not entirely in charge of the speed at which they're coming. You're just racing to put things together. And you think that's smart. Smarter is being in control of what the pieces are, where they're coming from, and how fast they're going. And that's not intellect. That's emotional and physical, metabolic and neurological. So I don't simplify the problem. And you can imagine, as a client of mine in psychotherapy, I can't dump all of this on everyone at once because then they just sort of run screaming from the room. But I have to kind of give it to them. I feel obliged to because it's important. And I try to understand which part of this is most needed by person. So if you're a creative person, maybe you don't need the creative speech. If you're an active outdoors person, okay, maybe you've got that covered. But the people who come for psychotherapy usually have something wrong. So they got some sort of burning fire that needs to be put out. It's usually the wrong one. I mean, it's right because it's burning, but all their attention is devoted to it. And they overlook the past. They overlook many things that aren't giving them a problem that also are important in the genesis of their problem. So going to the past is interesting and useful, but not that easy to do without somebody's help because it's hidden from you for a reason. Then you need somebody like me to be annoying and draw you back to say, what did happen to you and what do you feel about? I mean, in my line of business, you get a lot of people with bad parents or bad childhood experiences, some really miserable ones. And you can understand why people don't want to remember it or talk about it. And so it becomes a skill of mine to like turn it into something positive, sort of turn this compost heap of your past garbage into something nutritive. And it can be tremendously empowering once that happens and you see that you actually do have skills and you do have value. And you can begin the conversation with, have you paid me yet? Which a lot of people aren't willing to do. And you got to do that. So I always do. I have much less, used to have trouble with receivables because I'd give people credit. And I never do that anymore. Absolutely. You can't pay me now? We'll make another appointment. It's the way it is. You don't get any credit. It's ridiculous. I'm not a bank, as they say. And so I have no trouble with receivables. I either get it or I don't do the business. And I think that's probably important for any entrepreneur because in our society, everybody's looking for a way to gain a little advantage, and you will be the advantage they'll gain if you allow. And especially if you're an entrepreneur with a new idea, people are going to take advantage of the novelty of the idea to ask for proof and express their skepticism. And that has to not become a negative for you. I mean, what is the thing? Always be selling, right? ABC. Always be closing. Well, okay. ABS maybe. Yeah, that's kind of my motto. And it's interesting because I'm not always closing. I'm really always selling because I don't really know, at least in my area, I don't know where the close is. Do you want to make an appointment for next week? I do try to do that, but I'm a little sort of self-conscious about that because I don't know if I said enough. It's a little forward. I don't really know enough, but I do say that. It's part of my job. It's on my obligation. I'm not landing a fish to kill you and eat you. I'm landing a fish to help you and heal you. And I do recognize that I do it better than others. And if you don't engage me, you're out in the swamp of relatively untrained therapists who follow a formula and deliver much less reliably. So that's what I've got to tell people, even if it sounds stupid. And I can make it sound intelligent. I do get difficult people like schizophrenics and psychopaths who just are difficult by their nature. And that's interesting, but difficult. So that is a long explanation for a very simple question, but
That's
I
all
tried to
right.
give some useful.
It was all excellent. I absolutely loved it. I simultaneously want to ask you every question I've ever thought of versus I don't want to ask any questions and just let you continue to let your mind and brain kind of work itself out here because it's all insightful information and kind of puts us in a frame of perspective for understanding your history, your experiences, and kind of what we're going through. We need to kind of sit down and listen once in a while instead of speaking so we can learn a bit more everything from your experience, from the scientific to the analytical to the quantum computing, the computers. What is this life all about? Because it's like our matter, our being, everything kind of works together. What have you kind of discovered through your enlightened journeys and your experience that tell you what everything's about?
I'd say two answers to that. One is that the meaning is important. And I try to get all my clients onto a path of meaning. If you're not engaged with something meaningful, it's going to be very hard to be devoted and focused on it. You're just kind of like slipping off curved ice or something. So you've got to find meaning. And the easiest place to find meaning is often when there's pain, trouble. It demands your attention. Sometimes it's justified. Certainly it's important. So trying to turn it into something positive is a great goal. So if you need money or feel you do, it may turn out that it's not money exactly that you need, but security or self-value, self-confidence. And if you understand that you're working for that, you'll get much more mileage than if you just think you're working for money, because the money you can get and it seems so insipid. Like you don't know what to do with it, because in fact, it doesn't do anything until you spend it for something. And that's another question. Are you spending it right? And I look behind you and I see a guitar and I see it in a nice stand. And I think to myself, I bet he doesn't play that very much. And I could be wrong, but I have a piano here and I don't play it enough. And I spent a decade playing guitar too, and I don't play it at all anymore, but I love it. And it made an impression and it's important to me. And music and frequency and rhythm are important everywhere in life because everything we do is rhythmic in a sense. You see that in brainwaves, you see it in our attention, you see it in our growth and engagement. And I try to get, there's a mode called alpha theta training, which is where you try to get a person to engage. Actually, this is right back to the bilateral exercise and the eye movement desensitization training, where you try to get a person's engagement to alternate between the broadly engaged, emotional, intuitive, and the intellectually engaged, focused, and declarative. And you want them to alternate on a rhythm of roughly 20 seconds. It doesn't really matter as long as they're doing it at some frequency. And like I say, it's bilateral, it's alternating, and it's really essential to solving problems. So finding meaning, this is interesting. If you focus on the need to find meaning in your life, in your relationships, it's not clear how to do it. And I can't really tell you how, but I advocate people use these methods and look for it with some patience and diligence and determination, and accept the progress they get without being too demanding and too short-sighted. So that's kind of what therapy amounts to for me. It's getting people refocused on meaning and getting them into a rhythmic groove that's stable and rewarding. And then the problems, I would like to say, solve themselves. A lot of the problems just dissolve of their own. They lose their importance under the light of significance. Like I have some relationship problems, which I refuse to let go of. And over time, and I'm talking decades, or at least one, and now going on two, I have to admit that maybe they're not going to resolve. Maybe they just need to dissolve. And they don't have the ingredients that I would like them to. And I'm operating on a lot of my illusions. And I'm a very stuck person. I get stuck on my illusions. So for example, just to take this off into left field, I was interested in an area of physics. So you mentioned it, particle wave duality, right? Are things particles? Are they waves? What does that mean? Is it relevant? And it caught my eye very early in my physics career, and it stuck in my mind for the last 50 years. And now I'm coming back to it, and I'm reading all the stuff over again, and I'm coming to some big conclusions. The fact that it was never taught right. It was always taught from the idea that this is the paradox. See, it works one way this way and another way that way, and the two third ways don't work together. And I'm thinking, well, of course they won't work together when you teach them both as right and they're both wrong. So I think one of the solutions to that paradox is that we misunderstand time. And there are a lot of discussions about time, but I think we so misunderstand time that we can't understand time. It's not a question of like going back in time or changing it, like rewinding a roll of film. That's not what time is. And we so misunderstand it that this wave particle duality sits front and center. And one of the ways to understand it or resolve it is to re-envision time. And you may not accept that, and that's fine. But if you're going to take these two views, that's the current way it's reconciled through quantum theory. And then an increasing number of people are saying, well, quantum theory is just wrong. I mean, if you look at it, it never had any details anyway. It was just a way of adding a state and an event, an experiment to get a result. And they never really told you what was happening in between. They never did. So it's clearly missing something, and maybe it's missing a lot. So that's finally coming home to me. And now I'm at the interesting point where I should write it up because it does help you clarify when you put some details in things. But then I'm back to the question of meaning. Does this really mean anything? Is this important for my life? Well, it's done a lot for my self-image. It's like, oh my God, now all those people who told me I was an A or a B or a C student, they're all full of shit. They didn't know. And I had one great physicist tell me I wasn't smart enough to work with him. And his one complaint about his own life was that he wasn't creative enough. And so now I say, okay, Steve, you were full of shit in your own way. I mean, you were brilliant and you were a walking library, a computing machine in a live form, but you never quite have asked some of the questions which it takes 50 years, some people to conceive of. So I feel much better about myself. And this ultimately allows me to ask you to pay me right now and various other things. It's like, I don't need to be under any cloud or delayed. So I have this attitude where I probably do know more than you do as a therapist. And I probably do have some better ideas about how to deal with your problems, how to deal with them, not how to solve them, than you do as a therapist, mostly because I'm different and I have experience. But at the same time, I don't know. You're the one who's got the whole library of memories. You're the one who's going to have to figure out what meaning is to you and what sustainable meaning is and how you're going to reconcile all these strange things in our society, like body dimorphism and social appearance and acceptance. And will your parents ever love you, ever get their act together? Never is the answer to that. But And how do you change things that you can't change, or should you even want to? So I don't remember exactly what your question is, but the answer was meaning, the meaning that you give to your life. And you, Chris, should have an altar, and on your altar should be the guitar. And it is. There it is, right in the corner. And you don't actually have to play it, but you do have to worship what it means to you. And maybe there are other ways to get into that melodic, rhythmic, harmonic frame of mind, because that's where it's really got to be. It's got to be in your head and your heart and your body. And they're not separate. So what do I say to a marketing entrepreneur? I'm saying, yeah, forget about marketing and entrepreneur. Work on yourself. And then the other stuff just comes out. Michael Myers, where did he come up with this stuff? And where is he today? I don't know. It doesn't matter. You will find you change over time. And I think the most difficult thing to accept is that you'll change over time. And the solutions that you found today, they won't necessarily solve tomorrow's problems. And you'll have to go on. And you should want to go on. And this is one thing I tell everybody. Go on and fail. Don't expect you'll succeed. New ideas rarely succeed at first. But if you don't have new ideas, you certainly will never succeed. So you've got to go on. You've got to accept the failure. You've got to accept the process of failure as a learning process and engage it and revel in it and not overdo it. Let's get back to that same line of foolish versus courageous. A lot of my clients aren't courageous enough. They're too scared of all their past failures, and now they're sort of wound up and upset. And I have to say, those failures weren't worthless. Those relationship disasters, those awful parents, they weren't worthless. Now you know stuff no one is going to know because you took it personally, and you can remember it appropriately, and you can turn it around. And like we all say with our parents, they've given us the model of how not to be parents. Well, some people say our parents are role models, but most people learned what not to do. So that's fine. So back to meaning and finding meaning. You can hire me and I'll help you on all that sort of marketing stuff. Oh, I have books. You can read books. I have lots of books.
I was just going to ask, where can people find out more about you online or get some resources or connect with you?
The website is mind.com. On there, people say the website is too crazy. It's all over the place. Yeah, it is crazy and all over the place. You have to dig at least down the second level. There's a therapy tab. There's a books tab. There's a blog tab. There's a brain science tab. And I would say the books tab. So the last book I wrote is called Operating Manual for Enlightenment, which I tried to bring together these three things of mind, body, and emotion, or intellect, body, and emotion. And that's really just coming out. It's available. But we got a lot of positive reader reviews from the early edition, which they've lost. So if you go to it, you'll see no reader reviews, which is embarrassing because they lost. But I'm trying to get them revived. Anyway, be the first to get the book and review it, and I'll be very happy. So that's where you go. And if you want to call me, I talk to you for a few minutes for nothing.
Excellent. And we'll have the links available down in the show notes and the description so everyone can get connected with Lincoln here. Now, I do want to ask, you mentioned some ideas you had when you were a student, but no one took you seriously. Were you able to revisit those ideas and put them into practice? Or do you mind sharing with us what those ideas were?
The idea was that there's a problem with time, and the foundations of physics are built on the idea of causality, that everything's got to have a cause. Because if it's not, then it's religion. Then you don't need a cause. You just invent one. So physics says you got to have a cause. Things don't happen unless something causes them. And then this gets back to time, because if you don't have time, then what does it cause? Right? So when you start mucking with time, you start mucking with the foundations of things. And that's been the problem, how to reconcile that. And my idea is that if you look at the way things are phrased in quantum mechanics now, it's telling you that you're screwing with the time. You're screwing with causality. And you've got to either reconcile it or fix it. And I don't know what the fix is, but the reconciliation is to change the notion of time. And it doesn't actually, it comes down to meaning. Does this actually do anything? And the answer is no. Or it doesn't appear to. It doesn't disturb anything. And that's really weird. You say, oh, the grandfather paradox. You could go back in time and prevent yourself from being born. No, you can't do that. So there is consistency. But it's also not the linear thing you thought of. So no one wanted to talk about that. They'd tell me, go away, kid, work on this Green's function problem or work on this phase transition. And so I did. And you learn some of the mechanics, but you're not necessarily learning the right stuff. You're just learning the old mechanics. If it's like you wanted to be a mystic, but they teach you how to make watches. It's like, okay, I know how to make watches. Doesn't necessarily help. But sort of, you can talk about time again. So that was what I was working on. And yes, I am back to working on that again.
Nice. That's great. I know when we're kind of earlier in our careers with anything we do, there's just never quite enough experience or age or credibility for us to be taken seriously. And it could be a bit disheartening as we're trying to bring new ideas forth and do different things. So I'm glad you're able to rework on them again. Should we in this world be looking at problems a little bit differently based on science and everything is basically absolute? Or is there variance that maybe there's other things we've overlooked and are thinking about things wrong? You mentioned it's with time and quantum theory. Anything else that you think we're kind of looking at this in the wrong way? We're not looking at the right telescope?
Well, I think the simple answer is take a psychedelic and ask that question. And I think you'll get a pretty clear answer that everything falls apart. And then the next question is how to put it together. And I think that's fair. I mean, it's the nature of human mind to try to connect things and to try to ignore the things that don't connect. And that's fair. There's just too much out there. We're pattern recognizers and organizers and tool makers. And everything that's been developed solves yesterday's problems. And every problem moves forward. Like if we still lived in an indigenous society with little communities of 200 people separated by 10 miles, cooking over an open fire and hunting in the woods, then some of our old solutions might still work. It's funny, as one of my adventures, I did go live with people who lived in little villages of 200 people at 10 miles apart. And their lives, the two things that were changing their lives were outboard motors. And so you've got these people dressed in loincloths of barefoot with this, like, how many horsepower Johnson outboard motor standing next to them, and chainsaws. And they say, we want to just cut the whole fucking forest down. We want to cut it down. Now we can get lumber, because we used to have to go wander up in the woods and it would take hours to chop these things down by hand. And now we can. And they didn't understand ecology. So their sense of progress was going to get them in trouble, just like ours got us in trouble in drilling oil and polluting the planet. And now you got a new problem and new opportunities. And that's the process. Does it ever end? I don't know. Maybe when the sun blows up, but that's pointless. I don't think it ends. And I guess that's what you have to accept. Progress equals pain and opportunity. And that's where the meaning comes in, because otherwise it's sort of static. And then you can fall back to religion and worship the same gods and do the same ablutions, get the same feedback and ascribe it to your own bad behavior or whatever, which I don't really like because it's not really effective. So engaging in that is a painful, productive process. And I don't know how to make it. The only way to make it positive is to become enlightened. To me, enlightenment is having equanimity in life, and not the limited life, but the unfolding life. So this is like Christian. Is it Jesus or is it Satan? Who's beckoning you forward? Because this is why I'm not a Christian or any of the others. It's because I believe you can't take them apart. Maybe we just invent them all. Or maybe it's the nature of metamorphosis. I once watched a crab grow a new shell and how it has to break out of its old shell. And I thought, oh my God, what would it feel like if your skin was splitting open? Not good. Would there be any choice? No. Would it be progress? Yes. I mean, that's sort of like progress. New business, new idea, new team. Is it going to work out? Chances are no. But you'll learn. And are you going to become Bill Gates? Oh, hopefully not, actually. But you've got to have some meaning. You've got to have meaning to go to. It's the only thing. And it's yours alone to define.
Absolutely. Lincoln, I feel like we need to have you on for a part 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 so we can talk more in detail about a lot of these topics. It feels like we have a bunch of insight and answers, but also it brings up more questions. And I feel like that's the kind of conversation that people should be open to. And I do appreciate that you're open to trying to understand things and figure it out. You're just kind of standing it. You're working through the process and the problems as you kind of describe it, which is evidence of a brilliant mind. So we appreciate you on to come and share that knowledge with us. Any last parting wisdom? We only have a couple more minutes available.
I'm always interested in hearing problems. So I'm intrigued about how you would cast this. See, I think my answer is going to be the same in every case. Meaning and significance, importance, how you fit in, what's meaningful for you, what's productive, what's evil. Evil's an interesting concept. And I'd like to hear how you phrase these questions, all the different kinds. I get this in psychotherapy. This is why I like psychotherapy. People come to me with these weird ideas, some of which are solvable and others. The most interesting ones, not the most enjoyable ones, are the people who are crazy. And crazy means they just can't find the answer. And I can't find it either. So those are interesting people, but they're exhausting too. And I appreciate If you've lived with insanity in any regard, you know how exhausting it can be in your family or in yourself, depression, stuff like that. So anything that sheds light on that stuff.
Wonderful. Absolutely. Yeah, we appreciate you coming on and sharing your insight with us. Thank you so much. Excited to get this out there and appreciate all of your hard work and excited to see what else your mind comes up with and helps advance society with.
Yeah, well, you're doing it too. Undervalue yourself. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here.
It's all about giving the
You are the
voice, putting it
you are
out
the
there.
foundation. You are the pedestal on which I'm standing. I'm just talking.
Happy to lift you up. And if there's any way we can swap and help each other out, I'm all ears. Happy to help you along in your journey as well.
Wonderful. Very good. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.